Morning, good afternoon. Welcome to the webinar, Mexico's Social Gender Bond, looking for new paradigms to promote social and economic inclusion of vulnerable groups. This webinar has been organized by IFAD's Latin America and the Caribbean Division and Mexico's National Bank for Rural Development, FIRA. We will be talking today about the virtues of using innovative financial instruments to promote social and economic inclusion of rural people. Let me first of all welcome our co-hosts. We have with us Karina Ramirez Arras, head of the Non-Tax Revenue Policy Unit at the Secretary of Finance of Mexico, and Alan Elizondo Flores, CEO of the FIRA, who will walk us through the successful placement of their inaugural social gender bond. After Mr. Elizondo's presentation, we will have what I am sure will be a rich conversation or discussion with our guests, Maria Antonieta Alba, former Minister of Economy and Finance of the Republic of Peru, Joe Puri, Director of IFAD's Environment, Climate, Gender and Social Inclusion Division, and Ben Powell, Director of IFAD's Treasury Services Division. Finally, Francisco Pichon, Country Director for Mexico, will be delivering the closing remarks of this event. Thank you all for making yourselves available for this meeting. The social gender bond, Bono Social de Género, was launched last October with the objective of leveraging private capital to invest in rural women's financial and productive inclusion. It came out within the context of the effort of the current government of Mexico, the administration, to incorporate the Sustainable Development Goals principles into the country's public financial system operations. And just a couple of weeks before the launch of this gender bond, the Mexican government also made public the results of the placement of a SDG bond, a benchmark size bond that was also got sustainable goals associated to the bond. As you may know, several other countries in the region are looking at this approach. We are witnessing a change from purely green bonds to the financing frameworks for climate and social outcomes. For example, COFIDE in Peru just tapped in the markets for a COVID bond, a bond that is it's related to outcomes to 3 SDGs. Chile recently published its sustainable bond framework, listing the categories that may be eligible for financing through this modality. And Colombia has announced that they will issue social bonds in 2022. Similarly, international financial institutions like the IDB are adopting this financing modality. I think this is a marriage that we will never thought would happen, private capital markets and the social agenda. It started very strong with the green agenda and somehow fostered by the international arena. But what I'm seeing different right now is that the social agenda financed through sovereign bonds is born in-house. It's coming from sovereign countries. Over the last few years, IFAD has been working on developing innovative tools for financing rural development. We have started with the ABC Fund, an impact fund, and also with the Rural Poor Stimulus Facility that took place last year after the COVID pandemic started. And in recent months, obtaining a positive credit rating from S&P and also Fitch has opened new gates for IFAD to engage with private capitals in order to obtain the necessary funding for the achievements of 2 of the SDGs, and hunger and extreme poverty. So why I bring this up? To make clear that all ways of funding social and rural development are in a moment of change. In a moment of change, those who have an open mind and eye for opportunities are those who are best placed to seize the day and win the future. This is the reason why we organize this meeting, because we want to win that future, not only for us, but for the people we serve, the vulnerable communities who live in the world's rural poorest areas. I would like to stop here, as there will be many things to talk about, and I would like to give the floor now to Karina Ramirez Arras, head of the Non-Tax Revenue Policy Unit at the Secretary of Finance of Mexico. The floor is over to you, Karina.
Thank you. Good morning to everybody, and thank you for the invitation and for putting this webinar together. It's giving us the opportunity to showcase the sustainable finance policies we are promoting at the Secretary of Finance in Mexico, given its increasing importance at the domestic and global arena. From the beginning of the administration 2 years ago, we started actively promoting an agenda on sustainable finance. First, with the creation of the Sustainable Finance Department, a position within the Credit Public Unit and International Relations. Then the creation of working groups with other relevant parties, such as the Central Bank and the development banks, and the Commission, National Commission for Banks. And we are now part of the coalition of ministers of finance for the climate action that initiated 2 years ago the Ministry of Chile and Finland. We are recently just created at the G20 a working group for sustainable finance. So it's increasingly giving more and more attention to this topic. So thereafter, we put together a series of initiatives on this topic across the different units within the Ministry of Finance, such as the issuance of the first sovereign sustainable development goals framework on September last year, and we including the implementation of ESG methodologies to consider as criteria during the design and implementation of projects financed by the development banks, such as FIRA and Banobras and other development banks. And we have other initiatives we are working on that are more ambitious and will require more time, but that we already started. That is the integration of climate risks criteria into the pensions and insurance systems, and the creation of started discussing the taxonomy for the financial sector, because there are clearly big differences between Europe's taxonomy and the taxonomy we might be able to have in Latin America. In this context, the issuance of FIRA Socials Bond is very good news for us, because it is an example on the kind of impact bonds we are promoting, and it is completely aligned with the sovereign SDG bond we issued recently. And they even complement each other, because FIRA's bond allows us to tackle specific development projects that we are not able to capture with an SDG bond, with a sovereign bond, no? Due to the constraints we have from our federal public credit law that only allows us to issue debt that is directed to finance investment projects. So FIRA has more flexibility on the issuance, and they can go more specific on the outcomes they want to achieve. I think the SDG bond that we develop, the framework provides an umbrella on the budgetary programs that have a direct impact specifically with 11 out of the 17 SDGs that Mexico has developed, and that were selected considering our constraint from the credit law, and the rest of the SDGs, such as the gender SDG, can be tackled with the issuance of impact bonds such as this one. And even though that our SDG bond is not directly tackling the SDG on gender, we're still planning to disaggregate data by gender and geo-reference on our impact report to the investors that we're currently developing. But I don't know, like just in summary, like we're very happy for this issuance, and we're very proud of FIRAS, and it's very good news that is focused on financial inclusion. That is something we are actively promoting, and we have there several programs at the federal level for this, and at the Ministry of Finance is something we're promoting. And that's it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Karina. This is quite interesting. I think that more and more governments are going to start using this type of innovative instruments, but at the same time, we have to think about the balance, since you don't want to have to introduce rigidity. So that's why I invited ex-Minister Alban to discuss this from their point of view. Now, without any further ado, I would like to give the floor to Dr. Alan Elizondo Flores, CEO of FIRA. Alan, you have the floor, and I understand you're going to be walking us through the placement of this successful bond through a presentation, and you have 25 minutes. Over to you.
Thank you very much. I would like to thank as well the persons that make possible this opportunity for FIRA, particularly Francisco Pichon, IFAD's representative in Mexico. And I would also like to stress two things. One that Karina already mentioned, this bond is part of a government strategy, and I will describe exactly how this government strategy links to this gender bond. And secondly, it is important for me also to say that the gender bond, it's only a part of a strategy. It's not the end, but a means, particularly to make very known what is the situation of rural women. This has been a very good instrument to make this social problem being known in Mexico and in the society, and particularly to a very relevant part of society, which is the investors in the country. So this is important to mention, and I will exactly say how this link goes into all the chain of credit that helps women. So I will start with this presentation. If we go to the next slide, we will see four parts. The first one, I will talk very shortly about the FIRA strategy. What is FIRA? How do we build our institutional program? Then second, how have we adopted environmental and social principles? Then I will spend more time on the gender bond. What is the situation of women? What is the type of credit we are giving? How many women are involved? And how do we think this is helping the situation, so that with these loans that we give, we are reverting the situation of inequality of rural women in our country. Finally, a short section with the results of the bond in the markets. The next one, please. Well, very shortly, FIRA is an institution. It's not a new institution. It has been in Mexico working for 65 years, and it works in the agricultural sector, but that includes also forestry, fishing, and the rural sector of Mexico. We do not only work with the primary sector, we also work with agro-industry. We also finance the commercialization activities that are related to the primary products, and services related to primary sector, such as, for example, restaurants or stores that sell products that are brought from the rural areas of Mexico. Next one, please. Well, what is the infrastructure of FIRA? First, we have to say that FIRA is a second-tier institution. We do not have branches all over the country that receive people and will give loans. We do it through a network of 80 financial intermediaries. Most of them are non-bank institutions, but we work also with 24 banks. So by doing this, we multiply the points of contact that rural producers have with our sources of funding. So we also gain in terms of specialization of credit and regional knowledge of the areas by working with these 80 financial intermediaries. We provide funding for them. This is particularly important for non-banks. They have difficulties to access public markets or loans from other entities, so we work with them and give funding. We also provide guarantees. The guarantee is an instrument that helps the banks or the non-banks to provide credit by sharing the risk with FIRA. they will not only take the risk of the producer or the smallholder, they will share in a percentage that risk with FIRA. So this helps us to entice these institutions to provide credit where we think it's better received. And most importantly, we also provide technical support. It will be difficult for banks or non-banks to specialize in rural credit. So what we do, and we have 500 people all over the country working with rural producers so that they receive technical support, they can structure these projects and then receive funding from the banks. Our personnel knows exactly what are the requisites to get a loan, and we help small producers to comply with them and get the credit. The next one, please. Well, this is related to what Karina was telling us. This is the strategy of FIRA. Well, as every institution that is from the government in Mexico, we have to follow a national development plan. This national development plan was published in 2019, following the strategy of this government. And below that national development plan, we have a sectoral plan that is related to the financial sector. Since we are a financial entity, we have to follow this one. And we also have the Sustainable Development Goals as an objective. So with these inputs, strategic inputs, we have built an institutional program that is linked to these objectives. The next one, please. Well, as for the SDGs, if we consider the instruments that FIRA has, we can say with certainty that we are producing results for 12 United Nations SDGs out of 17 that we see. So the most important for this presentation will be the number 5, which is related to gender equality. How do we tackle this? Well, this has to do with the instruments and the capacities of our institution. If we go to the next slide. Well, what are the capacities? We have the instruments that I already mentioned and the capacities, and we have set 3 primary objectives. So the first one has to do with financial inclusion. We reduce barriers that prevent producers' access to financial services with emphasis on smaller scale ones. The second primary objective has to do with increasing the productivity and efficiency in all segments of the value chains of the agri-food and rural sectors. And finally, the third one, very important for us, is contributing to the development of responsible and sustainable agricultural, forestry, and fishing sectors. So below these 3 primary objectives, we have developed strategies, 13 strategies that tackle each of these primary objectives. Now, if we, I'm not going to go through these strategies, but I can tell you that for example, the 5 first strategies are related to the primary objective number 1, and they have to do with breaking information asymmetries from banks and the smallholders, providing information to banks about these smallholders, consumer protection, competition. So these strategies go one-on-one on this primary objective and help our institution to make credit go to smallholders. The next one, please. So we built these graphs that are very much related to the FAO strategy, and we see that our own strategies also go tackling these SDGs that I mentioned before. So, for example, if we see gender, we have the 5 strategies that are related to financial inclusion do help to make a progress on gender equality. The same for strategy number 8 and 6, which is related to productivity and efficiency, and so on. So this is the way we have built our strategy to tackle the SDGs. The next one, please. Perfect. So this is FIRA as a whole, and how do we build our main strategy. Now, if we go to the next one, we will see how do we tackle the sustainability. First, we have managed to build 3 pillars. These three pillars are, if you see them together, can tackle the sustainability, for example, for the sustainability with the climate. It can also be related to the social problems, financial inclusion, etc. You can see these three pillars working together, and we are very disciplined in working in one of them. The first pillar is named as do no harm. This is, we use very short words to remember and make very clear what we do. With this one, we try not to contribute to make the problem bigger. Let's think about the climate change. If we were giving loans that make this problem bigger, then we will definitely not be contributing to sustainability. So that is the work we do, and I will give some examples on how this pillar works. The second one is pillar number 2 is the do good. So not only do you have to contribute not to make the problem bigger, but also you have to provide solutions to the problem. So we have to think about what are the instruments and the actions that will make the problem to become smaller. And the first one is the one that has to do with the gender bond or the green bonds we have issued, which is to involve. How do we involve? Well, we offer resources, incentives, and information to establish durable solutions for the problem that we are tackling. So the gender bond, when it went to the market, was a very powerful tool to involve the financial sector and investors into the knowledge of this problem and bringing some solutions such as investment in our institution. If we go to the next one. So one example of the do no harm pillar. Well, in FIRA, we have worked with sustainability with the climate, and we have introduced an environmental and social risk analysis system. This is since 2018. So this system obliges us to identify all the environmental risks. We have to evaluate them and introduce some risk mitigation measures in case these projects are making any sort of disruption in terms of the environment or socially. And finally, we supervise this mitigating action. This is a methodology very much in line with the Equator principles, and it has been working in our institution since 2018. So with this, we can certainly say that we are not harming this objective, and we are disciplined in making these mitigation measures work. The next one, please. What would be an example of the do good principle or pillar? Well, in terms of climate sustainability, for example, we have built, together with the help of other multilateral entities, 55 concepts that we have grouped in 4 categories. For example, energy efficiency, sustainable agriculture, renewable energy, or the use of water efficiency. This is a list of 55 concepts that we finance positively, and if possible, we can convey some subsidies or preferent interest rates for the intermediaries and the smallholders or producers to adopt these technologies. So this is going forward in making a change happen. For example, in financial inclusion, how do we do good? Well, we work with technology. For example, we are building an insurance platform for smallholders to have better options of insurance and better prices for them, and also facilitate access by getting more information on these insurance products that are related to their activity. We have built, for example, we are in the process of building a platform for georeferencing and satellite data. With this information, we lower the cost of supervision of loans that are devoted to smallholders that are producing corn or wheat, because this information is cheaper to get than going and supervising in person the projects, and makes possible the financial inclusion of these smallholders. We also have found that smallholders rarely have a collateral to provide to financial institutions. So for that, and trying to do good, we have worked on financial guarantee products, either first loss or pari passu, so that financial institutions do not require collateral anymore, and the loans can go forward with the smallholders. And finally, gender equality, we have built several programs: the family farming program, the rural financing under the supplier and buyer development program. And I will not spend some time now because we are talking in the next section about this exactly. And microcredit. The next one, please. An example of the involvement principle. Well, one trend that we have seen consolidating in the industry is about the environment, social, and governance principles, and the interest of large investors to receive information and invest in bonds that are related to these three principles. So what we have done is we have built a portal in the FIRA website, and we invite you to visit it, that provides all the information related to the climate change, how agriculture is particularly affected by climate change, and also how agriculture is contributing to climate change. So this information is described in our portal, but also the actions that FIRA undertakes to make a change, at least in the Mexican arena, with the instruments we have. We also have a section on the social opportunities, the human capital, our stakeholders, product responsibility, and also some description on the challenges of financial inclusion of our country. And finally, the governance. We invest in our portal a good amount of time on describing how is our corporate board and structure and our ethics built, so that we can provide confidence to investors and also share with them a long-term relationship. The next one, please. Well, now we are entering into the specifics of the gender bond. The next one, please. Well, first, the FAO has been the first to point out that women play a very important role in the rural sector by contributing to the household food security, the income earning, family care, and this is simultaneously, and also management of natural resources and biodiversity. But with the national statistics, we have also found that these activities are not remunerated in the same way as men, or do not provide social security services to women in the same rate as men, even though they work in several more activities and provide a workforce that is instrumental for the production of food in our country. We also have taken some of the analysis of the World Bank to conclude that if women were included in these activities, the impact on GDP growth will be even stronger than the impact generated by the demographic bonus. So this is a statistic that has impressed us, and part of this analysis has taken us to produce certain financial instruments that help women to enter this ground. The next one, please. Well, in terms of financial services, we also see in Mexico that women are behind men. So if we talk about bank accounts or accounts from non-banks, we see that women have only 33% of them have an account, while men have 39%. And so is the same story for the formal credit, where men have a 33% share, while women have a 29%. And this is even lower if you go to smaller communities, such as the ones that have less than 15,000 inhabitants. So what happens? I would like to spend some time on the spiral you see on the right-hand side. This lower or lesser access to credit provides a spiral that goes on and makes women remain with the situation I just described. The first one is that since she has less capital, then she cannot access to credit. And then if she doesn't have access to credit, well, she won't be able to contract some labor or tools to make her activity. Technology remains far away from her. The supplies that she needs to produce the products that she wants to develop, or most importantly, the production networks of the buyers of those products that she is producing will be far away or not easily accessed, since she doesn't have the previous other instruments. So this is exactly the thesis that we would like to revert. We would like that arrow to go anti-clockwise by providing credit. And we have to start by making these production networks happen in the favor of the women. So that is exactly the model we are talking in this gender bond. Let's go to the next slide. Let me talk about this example and keep in mind this spiral I just talked about. Well, this would be what we call a chain of small suppliers with a large company. In this case, it's an export company of coffee that works with Germany and France, Cuba, Puerto Rico, and the USA. So this is the larger exporter of coffee in our country. This company cannot produce the coffee by itself because it will require a large share of land and also people working that land. So they are obliged to go and search who are the producers, the geography that is better for the coffee, and make arrangements for receiving the coffee from them. So this is the case for the states of Puebla, Veracruz, and Chiapas. So this company has 6,900 small producers. So what do we do in FIRA for this chain to remain very well tied and happen? Well, first, we provide funding to this large company. This large company will get funding for their activities, maybe processing coffee, but they will also need funding to have a separated area to prepare the plants that will be prepared be given to the suppliers, and also to buy this coffee from small producers. And what do we do on the other side? We provide a guarantee or funding to small financial entities. In this case, the name of the entity is called Caja Songolica, which is a small community in the Veracruz area. And this Caja will be providing the credits to these small producers. Those credits will help for them to get the supplies from the industry, and also develop their work for the months that is required for the coffee. Now, I have to mention and stress very much that financing will not be enough. What is most important for us is to provide technical assistance to these small producers. Without this technical assistance, it will be very difficult for these producers to achieve the quality that the industry is waiting. So that is as important as the financial scheme. And this is what happens on the left-hand side. So we provide specialized consultants. If they are not employees of FIRA, we contract them. And then we form groups. We provide this technical assistance. And then, well, this coffee is developed with the standard of quality and sold to the industry. So this is what happens in these programs. I stress this because going back to that spiral, most important in this program is that we have opened a market for these small producers in association with the industry. The price is a price that is known for them, so they know that they will get they get certainty on the price, and they get the leverage by getting the resources from this Caja and from FIRA. Obviously, we have to provide certain guarantees for these financial entities to go forward. The next one, please. Well, this is the number of women that are related to our scheme. So the day this bond was issued, this was the portfolio that was already built. There are three categories: the financial inclusion, which is the first time these women receive a credit; labor and productive initiative, which is women that have already received a credit and maybe they are using on a second or third cycle of production of coffee; and then finally entrepreneurship, which is women that maybe are investing in a tractor or a machinery that takes a longer term credit. So just to end with this slide, we are talking about 14,000 women, 40,000 and 2,083 women that are mostly in the area of financial inclusion. Sorry, just to make it clear, we have to double this number since we have issued 3,000 million pesos, and this is a portfolio of 1,426 million pesos. So we have to go double to make this compromise that we have taken with investors. Next one. Finally, a short mention of results. The next one, please. Well, this is a time series of the FIRA emissions in the market. So when you see a blue bar, this is a normal emission. All of them are in the same format, which is 3 years, a floating rate. So we have done since 2012 this same format. And you can see that we are on average 22 basis points above the interbank rate. Then in 2018, we issued the first green bond. So you can see that it was successful in lowering that spread. The same happened in 2019. And in 2020, in one of the worst months for the financial markets, it was June, we issued the green bond. And the green bond got a spread close to 40 basis points. It is important to mention that in October, we issued this gender bond, and this spread lower down almost equal to the average, historical average that we have faced through the years. But most interesting, I would say, is the next graph, which is that when we issue a bond, which is a green bond, we typically receive maybe 1.5 or 2 times the amount that we issue. So 2,500,000 on the first one bond, we receive 4,587 million pesos on demand. But this you can see that in this last emission in October, the demand was increased very close to 4 times. So for us, this is a very clear sign that this social problem was well transmitted to investors, and they showed a strong interest on coming and buying this bond. We receive funding from pension funds, insurance companies, investment funds, banks, and private banking. So in that sense, we consider this issuance a very good first step, and our next steps will be to involve other issuers, private banks, to do the same, since we have already built the frameworks for repeating this action. Next one. Well, with this slide, I end. I think I am very close to the 25 minutes, and I thank you for your attention, as I also already said, and open to any question you might have. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Quite interesting presentation. I think issuing this type of bonds is something that not necessarily that easy, like the plain vanilla sovereign bonds. It's not a simple task. You need to put together this results framework that you just described, and have this strong rationale to transmit trust and attract investors, because this is an innovative way to get cheaper financing for the social agenda. So one of the pleasures of this webinar is to be able to share it with an exceptional young professional, highly committed to public service, Maria Antonieta Alba, or Tony Alba. Tony, during your time as Minister of Finance in Peru, you were implementing a system to prioritize investments in order to close social gaps in Peru. I think this effort came within the results-based budgeting framework used in the ministry and with a clear focus on improving the quality of expenditures to reach all citizens. So within this context, do you see a potential in the use of impact or social bonds for this purpose in a country like Peru? Do you think social impact bonds can act as an anchor for efficient or an effective public policies, or do you see risks? Over to you, Tony, and welcome to this seminar.
Hi, good morning and good afternoon. First of all, I would like to thank IFAD for the invitation and congratulate Mexico for their efforts in innovating in order to improve the well-being of their citizens. I was, as you know, Minister of Finance during the crisis, and it was impressive how Mexico, having to deal with this huge economic crisis, had also in their agenda these very important issues. First of tackling directly the question, I want to share some thoughts about what I think is happening in Latin America that maybe it can also be applied to other countries. No, in the last years, we have seen massive protests in Chile, in Peru, in Colombia, and many economists and political scientists are trying to understand the puzzle, why social movements proliferate in these best performing economies of Latin America or the region. And I don't want to oversimplify the analysis, but in some way, I think that we are failing managing the budget. The budget is that important channel that links economic growth, that generates revenues for the country with the citizens' well-being in terms of delivering good public services. And so I think that, for instance, in Peru, you see in the last 2 decades, the budget has multiplied by 5, but of course, citizens do not feel that the quality of their living standards is improving, and we can see how impressive was the increase in budget in sectors such as education, and the learning outcomes have not improved and are really stagnated. So I think that this situation where economic growth is not transforming in better delivery of public services for people generates lots of frustrations among citizens in our countries. So I think that policymakers around the region should be much more aggressive in implementing tools for improving the quality of expenditure. And I think that the example that we saw today is a great example of what are the tools or what is the agenda that we have to undertake for the next years. In the case of Peru, Peru embarked in this major reform of the budgeting system many decades, I think like more than a decade ago. The main objective was the value for money of each dollar or each sol invested for citizens. We started with relatively simple tools like the performance-based programs that defines a theory of change with evidence in order to identify what are the products that different agencies from the government should deliver in order to reach a very concrete objective for improving well-being of citizens. And I think that, for instance, the reduction of the chronic malnutrition that Peru experienced in the last decades is an example of how you can use these budgeting results performance tools in order to increase outcomes for citizens. Then we entered to a more sophisticated instruments that we implement, and you were Deputy Minister of Finance in Peru, Rosana. We implemented lots of incentive programs that give additional budget to different agents in the country in order to pursue a very concrete and material goals. And you can see, and building on the experience of FIRA, when you implement these kind of tools, you make like a good spillover in the system. You have to implement M&E instruments. You have to make the public servants think about performance. So I think that these kinds of instruments generate amazing spillovers that build capacity state also. And I think specifically about social bonds, I think that definitely is the next step that Peru should take in fact, when I was appointed minister, with a team of the Ministry of Finance, we started designing one social bond, but after the COVID crisis came, so our agenda was more focused on the COVID crisis. That is impressive for me that Mexico, even in the middle of a crisis, was able to implement this amazing instrument for improving the well-being of their citizens. I think that also something I learned from the presentation of Jesús is that these kind of instruments are really a great instrument to put in agenda relevant topics that are usually invisible. For instance, these problems with gender gaps in our countries, these problems that women from rural areas face, they are groups of citizens that do not have voice. So I think that really this experience that FIRA presents us is like a very concrete example of how we can use this instrument to put relevant topics in the agenda of the country, such as the gender gaps in Mexico. So I think that, as I mentioned, the next step for Peru is to implement this kind of instruments, and we have to take into account the fact that Peru's financial, there's a lot of appetite for Peru's financial instruments. Like a couple of months ago, Peru issued for the first time 100 years bond, and they had a huge demand. So I think, as you say at the beginning, it's like it's a win-win situation when you can mobilize money from capital markets in order to close social gaps. I think this marriage, as you mentioned, is really very important, and it's a path that we should take as countries. No, I think also that IFAD or multilateral organizations can really make our countries think about this, not only giving technical assistance in designing those instruments, but also putting the topic in the agenda. So I also want to thank IFAD for this huge interest in advocacy for this kind of instruments. And I think that these kind of events really make that we share learnings and build capacities among our countries. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Thank you for your thoughts and for elaborating so well on this. Really, what you said about this type of instruments helping put in the agenda those that are invisible and which are exactly the people that we work for in IFAD is quite important. Now we have Jo Puri, that, as I mentioned, she is the Director of Environment, Climate and Social Inclusion Division. I think Jo is going to share with us a few slides, and we would like to hear from her her thoughts about this type of instruments and how does she see a role for IFAD in this, and what do we need to remain partners in this innovative road. Over to you, Jo.
Thank you so much, Rosanna. I really appreciate this opportunity. And I also want to thank Dr. Allen, as well as Francisco, for inviting me. I think it's a really interesting, very exciting, and quite provocative session as well. So in preparation for this session, actually, I thought I would reflect a little bit on our own learning. So this is from my learning. Previously, I was at the Green Climate Fund, and then I've been working with evaluation and with verification for a long period of time, but I've also worked in countries and with multilateral agencies. And as Rosanna said, one of the, my current portfolio really looks at social inclusion and at climate and environment issues in a very big way. And one of the big concerns I think that we have dealt with, and my work has looked at, is the extent to which we can have these sorts of symbiotic ecosystems where we have the public sector or the multilateral agencies coming forward and working together with the private sector to essentially leverage resources on one side, but also technical assistance on the other. But I think there's also a third actor that we regularly forget, which is the actor that verifies a lot of the impacts on the ground. And Alan spoke about this actually quite well, but I thought that I would reflect a little bit about on my experience, also drawing from our look at the literature as well as experiences on the ground, primarily in Africa, as well as in Asia, to then try and understand as to where some of the pitfalls are. And I thought I would also ask Alan, because Rosanna, you said this was more like a fireside chat and a conversation. So also invite Alan to also engage in some of his reactions to some of the experiences that we are seeing. So with that, next slide, please. One of the experiences that we are seeing are, that with impact bonds, with social impact bonds, with gender lens impact investing, with climate bonds, with SDG bonds, there are persistent challenges to what are called impact measurement. And clearly the promise and the attraction and the seduction of these bonds are that we are leveraging the private sector to essentially see socially inclusive, climate-related impacts on the ground. But next, please. What we are finding, at least in the experiences that we've seen in a lot in Africa, especially in health, as well as in Asia, is that there are unclear impact measurement standards in the industry. And by the way, before I go forward, I do want to congratulate Mexico. I've been a big fan of a lot of the measurement, how Mexico has been at the forefront of measurement, especially with respect to its social funds, with respect to its social and public programs. And I think, asking Alan and Tony to also reflect on some of their experiences as to how we can deal with this, with some of the challenges that we are seeing in the rest of the world, would be really terrific as well as a consequence. So one is that there are unclear standards that we are seeing. The second is that in a lot of this measurement where we are looking for impact, whether we're looking for impact on the ground with respect to climate mitigation, increased resilience, whether we are looking for impact with respect to decent jobs, nutrition outcomes, or other social inclusion indicators, the impact measurement methodologies themselves are not very well developed. IFC, for example, has developed principles of responsible investing. Those have been taken on by a large part of the industry. But even if you look at the ESG, the environment, social, governance, impact industry, very few of these have actually been taken on. Next, please. And what we are finding is that there's insufficient collaboration between impact investors on one side and the measurement community on the other. And this is, next please, this is leading to essentially a lack of understanding of impacts. Next slide, kindly. And then we identify, and this is in a paper that we've recently published in the Global Handbook of Impact Investing, that there is then a problem of impact washing. So this is when impact focused claims are basically made without evident positive environmental or social impact. Next, please. And essentially it comes from, the idea that the verifiers themselves are the ones who are the bond issuers. So in FIRA's case, of course, this is, I think, quite separate. And I was going to ask Alan to also comment a little bit about who are the verifiers who are coming in to then look, to then examine the impacts and who are essentially validating those claims. But in a large part of the industry, especially with the private sector that does issue, for example, green bonds, we find that those that are issuing the bonds are also announcing the impacts that they are making. So there is clearly then a conflict of interest there. There is also predominantly a focus on performance contracts or output contracts rather than contracts that are focused on development outcomes and impact. And then essentially my co-authors and I are really talking about the importance of having uniform and evidence-based methods for impact measurement and greater communication. And then my last slide, and I really did take Rosanna's, next please, Antonella. I did really take Antonella's invitation to think about how can an international agency such as IFAD really think about coming in and leveraging private finance in these symbiotic systems where we are able to bring in the private sector and what role can we play, right? So next please, and keep clicking, Antonella. So essentially this is positioning and thinking about how the multilateral space can really come in this area where we are thinking about impacts on the ground, impact on rural smallholder farmers, and in the case of gender, impact on women, but really trying to understand what is the financial inclusion indicator that we are looking for and what is the equity related impact that we are looking for. But here, essentially, IFAD, or the multilateral space, would really act as the outcome pair, would then collaborate with the private sector, who's the initial or the first investor, who would then work with governments, who are the service providers or the executors on the ground, who would then in turn work with agencies such as FIRA, who would also provide the technical assistance on the ground, then to make impacts for either smallholder rural farmers or for women's groups or for nutrition related indicators that are actually impact indicators, but separately bring in verifiers who are paid by the outcome pair, so that we essentially decouple what we're seeing as the big cause of also impact washing, so that we could then actually see impacts on the ground. And so with that, Rosanna, I'm going to hand this over back at you to essentially pose the question to Alan. Where do you see international agencies such as these coming in? What is your experience with impact washing, impact measurement, and how do you think we can do this better? Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe. Quite interesting and provoking. I think these are the right questions. I would like to address to the participants that you can start sending your questions through the chat, and we will gather them. And if we are not able to cover all of them, we will send you an email address where you can send your questions, and we will get back to you as soon as possible. And I would like to pass the floor to Ben, and then because Joe has posed some questions for Alan, and we can wait after Ben. Maybe Ben has also some questions for Alan. So Ben, there are different types of bonds programs that have been created in the market to help catalyze resources to expand the financing frontier for women and other vulnerable rural groups, like, for example, IFC's Banking on Women bond program that you share with me. Have these type of bonds proved successful? Are investors engaging with them? Do you think IFAD could, this type of bonds could allow IFAD to enter in the world of impact investing and facilitate the funds mobilization of private funding for its programs? Over to you, Ben.
Thanks, Rosanna, and hello, everybody. It's a big question. I'll do my best to answer it. I mean, I'll give you some context here. I mean, I'm treasurer of IFAD, but in my former life, as you could say, I was leading the funding for IFC, and actually in 2013 we launched a gender bond to finance a portfolio of loans, what we called the Banking on Women portfolio at IFC. And the reason why we could do this was because we had been issuing green bonds already. And so what we thought was, so this is one of the first social bonds in the market, in fact, in 2013. But the reason why we thought we could do it is because we learned from our experiences on launching the green bond program. So you have the framework by which you can set aside or earmark assets and qualify the assets and apply the framework that we thought was more than transferable to the social investments that we were doing at IFC. So I think the FIRA example and the example of Mexico and the example of many other sovereigns and sub-sovereign agencies and corporates and financials that have now kind of used this model that really started with the green bond market and the green bond framework and the green bond principles that were then created, the social bond principles thereafter, shows that there is tremendous scale available to issuers that have and that can, as Joe said, the key to success is a clear, simple framework and clear metrics with respect to attributing your borrowing to your projects and the impact metrics associated with that. I mean, back in 2013, we perhaps weren't very good at that part of it when we did it with IFC, but we knew investors wanted this. We knew investors wanted green bonds. They wanted to be able to link their investments to, climate action. They wanted to link their investments to social impact. And I think this was also mentioned earlier, is that's the beauty of this product, if you like, when we talk about green bonds and social bonds and sustainability bonds, is that you're linking borrowing to the impact of the organization, whereas that wasn't possible before. When we were borrowing in the past, we would basically say for corporate purposes, right? Period. Use of proceeds, corporate purposes. And that has very much changed now with the introduction of social bonds and green bonds. And I think that's really important, is that you're able to really link to operations, and also it gives a tremendous amount more visibility to what the organization is doing. I could go out with my colleagues from the business side of IFC, and I could talk to investors, one, about the credit and the borrowing program, but equally I can talk about the underlying portfolio and the impact that we're creating, and that is only going to get more and more important with investors wanting to really attribute their investments, like I say, to social and climate impact. So I think, and FIRA have done this remarkably well, and it's great to see, and you could see it in the stats, the oversubscription. So the amount of investors that came into the bond was way higher than on a conventional issue. So I think the proof is in the pudding there. It's just interesting to see also the scale. I'll give you a stat as well to really show that this market has gone a long, long way. In 2013, I think it was less than $500 million of social bond issuance. In 2020, that's now $147 billion of issuance. And I think, so this really proves that there is a huge potential for this type of product. I'll give you another anecdote as well. And that's, when you look at the European Commission's response, their COVID response, and the 100 billion euros of funding they have to do is in social bond format. So I think this is incredibly telling that they're using the social bond format as a way to access the funding that they have to do with the COVID response. With respect to what IFAD can do, I think we have a tremendous opportunity when we think about the borrowing that we're going to have to be doing in the future. It's absolutely critical that we use the operations and link the borrowing to the operations and link it to the Sustainable Development Goals, because we have that data, we have that information in hand. And we would be foolish not to really put that front and center with respect to our borrowing program. So I think that is something we have prepared right now. We're on the cusp of launching what we call our Sustainable Development Finance Framework. We've worked with colleagues across the house to create this. And I think importantly, at the same time we do it, we will be offering investors a mock impact report. So basically showing investors, okay, in a year's time after we issue the bonds, this is what the impact is going to look like. This is what the attribution to specific SDGs is going to look like, because investors want to know that right up front. I think Joe made this point. Investors are really, getting their magnifying glasses out with respect to the impact, and making sure that we have kind of watertight metrics that they can attribute their investment to. So I think we have a huge potential for IFAD with respect to kind of embedding this into our borrowing plans. But I also think we can help our clients too with respect to advisory if they're thinking about incorporating this type of financing themselves. We think about our private sector strategy in the future. We have the capacity to support these types of issues, support these types of frameworks for our clients as well. So I would really like to think that the capacity that we have in IFAD, we can then pass on to clients with respect to if they're thinking about bond frameworks in the future. So that's it from me. Rosanna, back to you. Oh, actually, question, Alan, I forgot. I mean, I've been on the on the side of the Treasury and raising funding in green format, in social format. That's for me is that's the most technically difficult part of it is how you're managing the balance sheet. So I'd like to ask you, like, how do you ensure, because you're earmarking the balance sheet, right, in green, in social, and maybe you're doing conventional bonds as well, right, which are not, let's say, they're not labeled. So how do you ensure that you can attribute to the impact effectively, given that you have, not just one pool of cash that you're borrowing, but essentially, 3, maybe 4, that's earmarked on the balance sheet. So just a question from that aspect, because that was a real challenge for me when we started issuing at IFC. So with that, Rosanna, over to you again.
Thank you, Ben. I think we have interesting questions for Alan, and please feel free to ask to all our panelists, including Karina. I think that there is a lot of appetite for this type of bonds, and there is liquidity in the market. You see many investors purchasing coupons for these bonds. And they are interested in knowing how the proceeds will going to be used. But that's one part of the story. You have the other side, which is the measuring, the results framework and the measurements that Joe had mentioned. It's extremely important, the credibility and the trust. Because you can end up, from an investor's point of view, you can end up in an asymmetric information situation in which you don't know if the other side is giving you really a baseline that you trust. So having your local systems, your statistics. I mean, that's why countries like Mexico, Chile, that have a strong statistics systems are embarking in this, because they start with the strong statistics in-house, but for those that they don't have this strength, and other countries maybe IFAD for certain indicators can collaborate and contribute. So I would like to pass the floor to Alan. I think you have a few questions, and please, Tony, if you also want to ask a question. So Alan. We have Joe question, and we have a couple from the audience. The first one is, what will happen if the KPIs are not met? And then we have another one. Do you also provide training on business and farm management skills? And the third one is, in your presentation, you show the value of the gender bond floated in 2020. Which, if noted well, amount to pesos 3 billion. How did FIRA determine the target value of the mission? And are there enough bankable projects to absorb the funds raised? And if there are not enough, IFAD is ready. Over to you.
Thank you very much. Well, I would like to thank Joe and Benjamin for their interventions and questions. I would say that I agree with Joe in everything she said, except with one thing, that this session was not provocative before she started talking. and it's, I mean, it's very interesting what you say, Joe, and I would like to address very sincerely what is the framework we had set in FIRA, so that we can be inside our promise to make these loans to the purpose we said we were going to give them, and how we believe they are impacting the population we said we were going to impact. First of all, I would like to say that from our perspective, we see that this industry is, I'm talking about the industry of measuring impact, rating issuers. I'm talking about ratings of ESG ratings, and doing this verification of impact is a nascent industry. We see that developing. How can you make an homogeneous measurement of impact measurement? If you have, for example, a forestry bond, which one of the bonds we issued was related to forestry, the other was to greenhouses, then this is gender. We talked and heard about the experience of the COVID bond, sustainability. We have highways, we have housing in Mexico. I'm just talking about Mexico, and we are just looking forward to a bond that is related to fishing. So this is obviously a challenge to be homogeneous in measuring. The way we have gone forward in FIRA, it has to consider two dimensions. The first one is who is doing the rating and what is being rated. Is it so simple as to just count the loans we have given, or are we measuring exactly what progress have women done with the impact of loans? So let me tell you how did we do this gender bond and bring also some experience from the green bond. Well, what we built and spent actually a good time in building is a framework of reference. We work with the Inter-American Development Bank with a consultant to build this framework. So we got in-house for at least 2 or 3 months, a full-time team analyzing the loans that we were giving to women, and also in a previous experience to the rural sector in terms of sustainability. So they analyzed our situation, and they already brought to the table some knowledge on the situation of rural women. And we wrote this framework of reference where we make the thesis why these loans related to inclusion, or these loans related to this supplier buyer model make a difference with women. This document was written, published, but also we got a second party opinion from a company that is different from the one consultant that built together with us this framework. This company is the kind of Sustainalytics type of company that come as an independent party. They make an opinion, they will make comments if they find this framework something that is true in the purpose that it is looking forward. And then once we have this second party opinion, we are then in the position of designing the bond and programming an issuance. Now, once the framework is built, we look into our portfolio, the type of loans that we have already given in that direction. And well, we count them and we make a financial programming. And this relates to Benjamin's question. This financial programming looks at our pipeline of projects. We put specific targets to our employees to go and look forward for this type of loans, specifically on the amount that we are promising to issue. In this issuance, we make emphasis that not to include microcredits, Joe. And this was because microcredit, on our opinion, was not as strong the case in terms of how to benefit women, as the case was made with this model that we already showed. If we had taken microcredit, the amount of the bond would have tripled. But we didn't consider them because this is exactly the type of loan we believe will make the women work alone and open a path of development. And that is why we only include that. And obviously, we will be more slow in feeding these 3,000 million pesos that we issued. But anyway, this is the way we believe we are true to the objective. Now, I was mentioning who is going to rate us. Well, yearly, we will have to provide evidence that the loans that we described in the framework of reference are given, and someone will come after 1 year and develop a document that certifies that this was the case. We already have these visits for the green bond twice, the one we issued in 2018. Now, if we go further in your question and we go more profoundly, the evidence of the impact of programs in Mexico and in a country such as Mexico has also government parties that go inside the public entities and rate what is the impact of programs. I cannot tell you that they will rate this specifically because it's inside a larger number of programs that we provide. The entity in Mexico is called Coneval. It's an independent entity that does this type of analysis. And they provide us with recommendations and also good guidance on how to make our programs better to achieve the impact that we are meaning to achieve. So that will be one inside a government entity that helps us. We have also received interest from the UN women to do, and also from local entities. We have also an institute for women development in Mexico to go to the field to see the impact by themselves and to measure with the methodologies they have. I cannot tell you that we have that because we are a financial institution. We certainly can tell you about how we are dealing with financial inclusion statistics, how we are building on progress with women, and this is easy for us to account. But how is the condition of women, such as health, education, housing, or budget allocation, decision power inside the household? I think it's a larger endeavor that we need to partner with other entities. And as I told you, I don't see that we have a standard because of the variety. But anyway, this is the effort we do. As for the green bonds, the way we have made this more actionable, we have, it will impress you, well, maybe not because you are exactly the type of person that helps institutions like us, but we have a lot of assistance from entities, multilateral entities. KfW has been instrumental in forestry. L'Agence Française de Développement has been instrumental in measuring the impact, for example, of an irrigation system. So we can count how many, how much water are we saving, even for also greenhouses, how many gases are we keeping inside the ground because of these technologies. So we invest time on building this account so that we can translate these activities or loans into metrics that are related to objective. But this is, as I told you, a building process, and the basic framework is exactly the one I just described. As for Benjamin, it's, well, we do earmark the resources, but obviously, you know that money is fungible, and we can bring to one side or the other, but the compromise is there to provide 3,000 million loans related to this activity, and we will be supervised on that. What happens if we do not achieve that goal? Because that was another question. Well, I think it's exactly the same impact, but in another dimension of one issue that defaults. It's exactly that. I mean, we are going to pay the money. I mean, that's no question. But we will default on the commitment. So what happens to someone that defaults? Well, you will never get a funding from that, or all your commitment goes to the trash, and this is the worst thing that could happen. So we were very careful in selecting the amount and bringing 3,000 million pesos, which is what we think we can do. For example, if we were in 1,400 million pesos in October, in December we are already in 1,700 million. So that is progress into this agenda. So I would not like to make this reply larger, but I hope Joe and Benjamin, you get some more information on our side.
Thank you, Alan. I think I have a couple of questions, but maybe if I can start with Karina. Karina, from our audience, we have a question regarding, I know that you cannot disclose exactly the investors, but if the type of institutions or institutional investors that have more appetite for this type of bonds, if you see a pattern. And the second question for Tony, is that you mentioned that Peru was considering issuing a social bond, social impact bond, when the pandemic hit the country, and you had to prioritize efforts. The question is if what were the factors that led you to, how did you prioritize other things rather than the social bond, and if an IFI like IFAD can contribute with governments by easing the design and issuing challenges that you encounter. So over to you, Karina, and then Tony, and please, Tony, feel free if you have a question for Alan.
Thank you. Yes, definitely the pattern of this type of investors is increasing. We realized that when we had our non-deal roadshow in February in Europe, we were able with the issuance to increase our investors base, and investors that never had invested in Mexico, such as the Nordic countries, and for sovereign bond, for UMS, for our sovereign bonds, we were able to capture more market. And also we're seeing an increased interest in the US. The Europe market for sure is more developed in this kind of investors and this type of impact bonds, but the US is also, we're seeing also an increase on that. So we're definitely we are trying to have a program on this kind of issuances for our SDG bond because we want to capture these increasing interest.
Thank you, Karina. Over to Tony. I think we have 5 minutes left, but we will push for 7 because we need Francisco to give the closing remarks. Over to you, Tony.
Thanks. I think that my comment was about the time we had to invest our team, especially our treasury teams, during the crisis. You know that the revenue, because we had the most aggressive lockdowns of the region, like our revenue really fall down, so the treasury team had to be more focused on how we are going to close the budget gap, not only of the regular budget but also of the resources needed for responding to the crisis. One of the things that was really for me most challenging, and I think that it has been also been mentioned, is Peru's system, like data systems and M&E practices, are relatively recent. We are a country that we are still building all M&E systems. So for me, like the most big challenge there was how we are going to measure the outcomes that we're defining for the social bands. There were also a decision about outputs or outcomes. You know, when you think, for instance, about learning outcomes, like learning outcomes can be explained by different issues. It can be like the presence of the teacher in the classroom. It can be about infrastructure. So I think that we were also having some struggles defining whether or not our goals were about outcomes or about outputs. So that was like some technical technical issues that we faced at that time. But as you mentioned at the beginning, for instance, COFIDE, that was our development bank, has already issued one bond. So as a country, we have already started our path there. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we are reaching to the end. So I would like to pass the floor to Francisco to give us some closing remarks.
Thank you, Rosana and colleagues, and excellent exchange. And it's too bad we don't have more time to address some of the many questions that are coming in the chat, but we will follow up with you providing some answers. Very quickly, I would like to maybe conclude the webinar with 2 main comments or reflections that I think have implications for how we collaborate with the government of Mexico. and how we can add value and maintain our relevance as IFAD. I think the first message is that this discussion really provides evidence that there are new doors has been opened in terms of creating opportunities for women empowerment in Mexico, and that the most innovative aspects of gender social bond really help us bridge the gap somewhat for implementing the 2030 agenda in Mexico. I think this is very important for IFAD, and I can think of other themes that are very closely aligned to IFAD mandate. For example, the contributions that indigenous peoples do in development, or the role of migrants in development, or persons with disabilities. I think these are issues well aligned to IFAD mandate, and I think for us it constitutes a new frontier for supporting countries like Mexico to develop innovative financing instruments to ensure their economic and social inclusion. I think the fact that the government of Mexico has adopted or is promoting this social, environmental, and governance criteria as basic principles of their financial system operations really provides IFAD opportunities to really complement and work on supporting governments to ensure the quality of the public spending in rural areas. I think a second message is that this gender bond is really the first bond issued by a national development bank in Latin America. And I think in our own country strategy in Mexico, we have highlighted how national development banks are really at the center of closing the gender equality gap in Mexico. And I think they are doing so by really catalyzing resources to expand the financing frontier to support women entrepreneurship and to reduce this gap. But I think a very important point is that for really capturing the potential of these new financing instruments, there has to be an alignment of the objective of women equality and the institutions' policies and programs. So there cannot be sustainable benefits unless there is an institutional commitment for women equality and policies and specific instruments and approaches linked to this objective. So I think this is an area where IFAD can support, and basically we align our country program and our country strategy to add value to these aspects. And I think with that, I am happy to pass the word back to you, Rosanna, and thank you very much for your interest and participation in this webinar.
Thank you, Francisco. Thank you to all. This was, I think it's like an appetizer for more webinars on this type of innovative instruments. We have a lot of questions in the chat. We will try to group them together and send it to some of you. I just saw a question about if there are tax incentives for investors for these coupons. I'm sure there are. When I was doing roadshows, they were asking for this because they have tax incentives, especially in the Nordic countries. So there are many unanswered questions, as I said, but I think that we can answer them through the email. We sent you our internal inbox, and we'll be very happy to engage with you. Again, thank you, Alan. Thank you, Karina. It has been really a pleasure and a privilege to listen from you. And as Joe, I'm very fan of Mexico and especially Coneval. Yeah. Bye to all.
Thank you very much.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Thank you, Alan.